This interview is a part of the Oklahoma Historical Society's Oral History Program, Living Legends Collection. This interview was originally conducted on June the 15th, 1967. The interview is conducted by Mr. Guy Ross. The interviewee is Mr. George Shirk of Oklahoma City. This interview is being re-recorded on the 6th of June, 1985, for inclusion in the permanent collections of the Oral History Program by Judith Michener.
This is the 15th day of June, 1967. This is Guy Ross, and I'm talking today with George Shirk, who at this moment in history has just been out of the mayor's office in Oklahoma City for a couple of months, I guess. Mayor Shirk, why don't you relate your biography up to the time you became mayor?
Fine, thank you, Guy. This is an honor to be here. I'm greatly interested in this type of learning, and I appreciate highly the honor you've accorded me by such a tape as this. My own personal biography is not too colorful. I was born in Oklahoma City, 210 East Park Place. The house is still there, on May the 1st, 1913. We lived there until I was 9 years old, and then we moved to 626 Northeast 16th Street, where I lived until just recently. I attended Lincoln Grade School, Central High School, graduated in 1930, went to the University of Oklahoma, was a member of Phi Delta Theta Social Fraternity, several of the honorary fraternities, such as that. I secured my AB degree in 1935 and my LLB in 36. A number of people asked me why it took 5 years to get the AB. Believe it or not, it's just a little story. Then you could have a combined degree. Your freshman law counted as your senior year in arts and science. I was eligible for my AB in 34. I was so naive that I didn't realize that you had to go over to the administrative office and sign a card and go through a ceremony to secure your diploma. I didn't do all that and thought the diploma would be mailed to me because I knew I had completed all the requirements. It didn't come all summer, so when I entered school that fall, I inquired about my diploma, and they said, well, you hadn't completed your requirements, you hadn't gone through the graduation ceremonies. And they made me wait another whole year to go through this ceremony to actually get my diploma. So my AB is dated 1935 instead of 34. Upon graduation from law school in 36, I spent the summer studying for the bar and such as that. Took the bar examination in July, and we were admitted to the bar class by the Supreme Court in September of 1936. I practiced law in my father's law firm until November 26, 1940, Thanksgiving Day, when I was called up for extended active duty with the military. I was ordered to OU. I was selected, I understand, by Dr. Pizzell as authority had come through for reserve officers to be assigned to ROTC jobs. I became adjutant of the post, was there until May of 1942 when I was selected to be part of the staff of the newly organized European Theater headquarters in London. I went to London as a casual officer all by myself. Was certain I'd never get there, but sure enough I did. We formed the headquarters. I stayed in the one headquarters, which became General Eisenhower's headquarters. I was in the G1 division of the General Staff until time to come home. I reached Oklahoma City in time for Christmas of 1945 and returned to the practice of law, and still there at the same firm. Since the war, I've tried to be active in civic things. I'm a great believer in everyone attempting to pay their own freight for being on this earth. I've been active in the United Fund, the Community Council, been president 4 terms of the Safety Council. I've been very active in the Historical Society. I've been president of the Historical Society now for over 10 years. I followed General Key and most of my efforts at the Historical Society have been to upgrade the society, reach it to higher importance in the eyes of the citizens of our state, and to encourage local historical societies to reach the local level. And with my civic work, of course, you became to know a number of citizens in all walks of life here in Oklahoma City, and was practicing law in 1964 when the mayor's job came on.
You came into the mayor's office under not entirely unique, but not the common way.
It was unique, I believe, as far as Oklahoma City is concerned, Guy. I will never forget, of course, the day. One Wednesday morning about 9:30, my phone rang in the office, and it was Councilman Bill Ware. I had known Bill through some legal cases, although I was never his attorney, for several years. He said he would like to see me. We met down in the Skirvin coffee shop, and that's the beginning of the tale. The problem had been that Mayor Jack Wilkes, who had been president of Oklahoma City University, was selected mayor in the preceding mayoral race, ran on sort of a slate ticket. A group had been organized called the Association for Responsible Government. Was a sort of a civic movement of I believe, well-meaning and thoughtful and citizens of integrity in an effort to place people of what they believe their own kind into the mayor and the councilman jobs. Mayor Wilkes had run on their slate, and I guess the word slate is probably the best that describes it, and had defeated the incumbent mayor, Mayor Jim Norick, who, by the way, is now mayor again. Mayor Wilkes found himself in a difficult position. His duties at the school were very demanding. In addition, he had his obligations to his own church, the Methodist Church, Bishop Angie Smith, and in all events, he found it necessary to resign as mayor to accept the president of Centenary University in Louisiana. That left the mayor's position vacant. There had been considerable legal discussions, not only among the councilmen, but among a number of the lawyers in town as to the meaning of the charter, whether the council must select one of their own number as mayor, as one provision of the charter indicated, or if they could select anyone, as long as he was a resident of the city and qualified, to be mayor, as another provision of the charter indicated. There was discussions among lawyers as to bringing a friendly lawsuit, let the courts decide. All manner of discussion as to how the council could, in effect, select a new mayor. At the time, the council was very closely and firmly divided. The four senior members of the council, those who had been on before the ARG came into existence, were Bill Ware, Ty Aker, Harold Johnson from Ward 4, and Mr. Bill Kessler, who is now one of our judges. The four incoming councilmen who had been on the ARG slate coalesced when Mayor Wilkes was the mayor, while they had a 5-4 effect, and by the ARG group sticking so closely together, it had the natural reaction of the four holdovers, if that's the right word for it, the four senior councilmen, of they themselves equally coalescing into a very hard and firm block of 4-4. 4-4 as it was, and I do feel that the 4-4 came about more because of the close-knit organization of the four ARG councilmen than it did of the four senior councilmen. I believe the four senior councilmen coalesced as firmly as they did, primarily as a counterbalance to the solid block they saw facing them from the 4 junior councilmen. That meant that it would be impossible for one of the 8 to have been selected as mayor. Obviously, that would have thrown the balance the other way. Either side, you see, if one of themselves were to be elected mayor, then the vacancy would be filled by one of their own kind, and the balance would be 5-4 again. The matter drifted along for several months, and any number of people had been proposed, mostly quietly, by various civic leaders in an effort to secure a name that at least a majority of the council would agree on. I remember Granville Tomlin, an attorney in town, had been talked of. Jack High. Several councilmen themselves were interested in the position. I know Bill Ware felt perhaps maybe he could be mayor. I think several of the RG councilmen would like very much to have seen if it would have been possible. In all events, as I said, one Wednesday morning, Bill Ware called me. We met in the coffee shop over to Skirvin, talked for perhaps an hour. He pointed out that the matter had to be solved, that the stagnated condition of City Hall required a mayor, someone that both sides, and I guess I must use the word both sides, would find fair and could work with. Would I be interested? He said. I was so flattered as well as dumbfounded, I said no, but I would first have to talk to my law partners in all advance. I did, and one of my law partners, Jim Work, had been active in ARG. He couldn't believe it. He immediately called some of his ARG friends, and they too were skeptical as to how Bill Ware and the 4 senior councilmen would be interested in myself. The matter drifted along from that Wednesday on. Several of the other councilmen called me. I went out to see Ty Aker at his home out on West 10th. We had a very cordial visit. I did not have a chance to, was not invited or did not see Councilman Johnson or Councilman Kessler. The 4 junior councilmen all during the week found that my name had been proposed by Mr. Ware and Mr. Love. I went down that Saturday at his invitation, talked with him. I want to say in all fairness that neither group extracted any commitments from me, nor did they ask me to give any. At first, the senior folks asked me if I would agree to changing city managers. They had a number of objections to the then city manager, Bob Tinsman, who is still city manager. I said I would not agree to that. I well remember Bill said, well, okay, but if we can convince you in 90 days that he should go, will you vote for him to go? And I said, certainly I'll vote for anything you can convince me is for the best interest of the city. The same with the junior group. The ARG group did not extract any commitments out of me, except we did discuss the manager. They were bound and determined that he continue, and the senior group was equally bound and determined he not continue. The next Tuesday, this is 6 days later, the procedure for me to become mayor had apparently been agreed upon among themselves. I lived in Ward 2. The senior councilman from Ward 2, who was Bill Ware, resigned his post as councilman. Under the charter, the remaining councilman filled that vacancy. They elected me city councilman. I was then a member of the city council. I took my oath as city council, sat down in Mr. Ware's chair. Then, as a councilman, the council elected me as from among themselves as mayor. I then resigned as city councilman and became mayor. The remaining members of the council then re-elected Mr. Ware to the vacancy that I had just left. It was important, you see, that Mr. Ware resigned rather than the junior councilman from Ward 2, Jerry Byrd, because had Jerry resigned and his place had been refilled, then he would, of course, had to run again at the next election rather than wait another 2 years for his full term, whereas Mr. Ware's term was expiring at the next election regardless. That morning I which was June the 16th, 1964, I took the oath of office as mayor, and an entire new world and career seems like opened up for me.
Did you find the sudden onslaught of the mayor's office? It seems to me like it would just overwhelm you for a few days.
Well, yes and no. I must confess that I had no conception, and I doubt if anyone else who ever suddenly became in a major public office has the conception of the volume of work, the number of things in the mill, and the varied and complete spectrum of problems, projects, things that are demanding your attention. For a few days, of course, my principal time was devoted to well-wishers, telegrams. It took me several days around the clock to answer all of the letters and congratulations and such as that I had received. I asked the city manager to brief me on a number of current projects, and within a couple of weeks I was trying hard to learn the job and to give the city the leadership that it had needed.
In view of the what appears to have been the problems and the difficulties that City Hall was facing, at least the debates, etc., on the council, you probably had a pretty short honeymoon.
Yes. Guy, you see, this was June. The next municipal elections were in the following March, which meant that the 9 of us would be together, for better or for worse, for that 8 or 9 months. I recall within 2 weeks after I was there, a concerted effort was started to oust the city manager. I called all 8 councilmen into the mayor's office and made a little talk. I'm sure it was not effective, but at least I was trying, that we were all going to be there for the next 9 months, whether we liked each other or not, and so let us all be gentlemen and work together. We had differences, why resolve them among ourselves in a way to the credit of the city, and not to make it appear that the city was being stagnated by a bitterly divided group of men. I soon realized from the varying temperaments of the 8 men that if I was to be effective at all, I had to scrupulously avoid taking sides among the 2 council groups. I felt that I must call each shot, using the colloquialism, as I saw it. And any effort to favor one philosophy of the council over another would automatically doom me as far as my effectiveness, although it would make my job easier if it became obvious that I was pro one group or pro another, while then the lines were drawn and I would have little responsibility, just go along with whatever that side wanted. That was not the type of leadership Oklahoma City needed at that time, and by consulting both groups, particularly on the matter of appointments, I recall that the first thing that was before me was the appointment of the Human Relations Commission. I went in June 16th, recall, and the commission had to become effective July the 1st. Some 2 weeks later, I immediately went to work and on selecting the 9 members of the commission. I insisted that each councilman give me names. I tried very hard to balance the commission among all the different factors in Oklahoma City, both ethnic groups, economic groups, and so on, after consulting each and every councilman. I believe the success of those appointments on the Human Relations Commission set the tone of my relations with the 8 councilmen for the next 9 months. I believe within several months, each and every one of them realized that I was fair and that I did not destroy their confidences, and things that they would discuss with me stopped there, although I wouldn't necessarily agree to do as I was requested. They knew that I would give each and every one of them a fair hearing, so to speak, and would try very hard to accommodate each and every councilman's requests to me.
Did you ever have any problem if you voted on or if your position on a particular issue was, for instance, the position of the ARG or the position of the other one? Did you ever have any trouble with any of the given councilmen at that time, thinking you were beginning to side with the other group?
Well, I don't know whether they kept score on me or not, but I believe, and it's probably quite by coincidence, that I voted about as often with one side as the other. And for those 9 months, there were many 4-4 votes requiring myself to become the sole vote, so to speak. A number of things, such as the alignment of South Pennsylvania at Southwest 29th, the matter of Oklahoma City joining with the Highway Commission in the transportation study, whether we should have the Highway Commission do it or whether our own planning department should do it. Those were bitterly contested matters, and for example, on the alignment of South Pennsylvania, I voted with the senior people, and as I voted with them on the matter of the Planning Commission doing the transportation study. Those were major matters. The ARG councilman realized I voted the way I felt, and we became even better friends than before.
As I read the newspaper clippings and so forth, I'm impressed again by the apparent hotness, for lack of a better word, of the campaign to get the city manager fired.
Yes, that was very bitter, Guy. The city manager had become a symbol. I know Bob quite well, and I admire many of his qualities. Bob was selected by the ARG councilman with Mayor Wilkes' vote shortly after after they came into office. He had become a symbol of the ARG system or philosophy. He had done things apparently that had irritated some of the senior councilmen, or at least his method of running the city administration was not as the senior councilmen thought it should be. They launched a very strong and bitter campaign to have him removed. Had the votes been 4-4, I would have had to have voted, of course, to retain him or to discharge him. I well remember the Tuesday that it was up finally for a final vote. The preceding Sunday, I had prepared a 2-page statement that I intended to read on my vote, because I was certain in my own mind it would be 4-4. Mr. Ware and Mr. Aker moved and seconded that the councilman's office be declared, the manager's office be declared vacant. There was a long and bitter debate on it. Mr. Byrd and Mr. Petrie moved as a substitute motion that the manager be given a vote of commendation and support. The substitute motion under Robert's rules, of course, was voted on first. We called the roll on that, and it was 4-4, naturally. I voted against the motion. In other words, I voted against commending Mr. Tinsman, which had the result of defeating the substitute motion. A number of people in the room became quite alarmed at my vote. I could see people quite concerned, all out in the audience, as well as the 4 ARG councilmen, appearing that at least at the moment that I was going to vote to discharge the manager. And then announced the reason for that was, I said, I believe the basic motion is of such importance that it must be voted upon, and were the substitute motion to carry, then the original motion would never have a chance to be voted upon. And I said that is the reason why I voted as I did. I kept the discussion open for a few minutes for everyone to cool down. There was such alarm in the council chamber at my vote that you can well imagine the consternation of a number of folks, I guess even Bob Tinsman himself. So then I said, we will now call the roll on the original motion. And actually, you could have heard a pin drop in the room. When the roll was called, Mr. Bill Kessler voted no. He did not vote to discharge the manager. In other words, he voted against the motion of Mr. Ware and Mr. Johnson. So it went 5-3, and I did not get to read my speech.
I imagine the reaction was pretty strong at Mr. Kessler's vote.
Yes, I admired Bill, and later out in the hall I commended him, not because of how he voted, but because of the fact that he voted his own conscience. And I said, Bill, you have certainly vindicated anything that anyone has said about you to date. As far as I'm concerned, you are a fine and conscientious councilman. I never got to read my speech. I thought it was a masterpiece. When I went out of office, I took the original, which I still had kept, and inscribed it to Bob Tinsman. And I'm sure he still has it, so I guess as of this hour, he and I are the only ones that know what it says.
Not many months after you were appointed, then you decided to run for re-election, and it seems to me that you must have been on a tightrope.
Yes, sir.
As to whether or not to you'd alienate the ARG by not accepting it and so forth.
You mean as to my running as an ARG councilman?
Yeah.
I mean ARG candidate?
Yeah.
Yes, you're right. You see, the philosophy of the ARG not putting up a candidate had never crossed anyone's mind. It was assumed that they'd have a candidate for mayor regardless, and whether it was to be myself or someone else, I believe was at that stage of the game a detail. I had convinced myself that if I were to announce for mayor and announced on the ARG slate, I hesitate to use the word slate, but it's effective in conveying the meaning that I want it to have. The minute I announced as a slate candidate, then my effectiveness as mayor for the remaining period of my term until the next election would be diluted materially, because here I would be sitting up there as mayor on the same slate, same candidacy as 4 of the councilmen, and yet attempting to be fair and honest with all 8 councilmen, as well as for the best interest of the city. I felt that my own position while I was yet mayor, which of course would have been until April of 65, was more important than whether I won or lost the election. Because if I were to be an ARG candidate until April, while I felt I could not be an effective mayor with the council divided as it was, I more or less let word get around that I intended to run without a formal announcement to see what the ARG hierarchy thought they'd do about it. Mr. Frank Carey and Mr. Jack Johnston, a number of the so-called ARG leaders, I assume determined that I would be acceptable. So shortly thereafter, the ARG officials announced that they would not put up a candidate for mayor. Those who wanted to read into it assumed that meant that they were giving me a left-handed endorsement. I appreciated the fact they did not field a candidate against me, but I must report to you now, for all time to come, that at no time during my mayor's race, my candidacy for mayor, was I in contact directly or indirectly with any of the ARG group. Although I knew them, we were all good friends, as well as friends of the anti-ARG people. I felt that the mayor is the one official in our city who is elected by all the people. There is no other city official guy who is elected by every voter in our city. All the councilmen are elected only by a fourth or an eighth of our citizens. There are no other elected city officials. That being the case, I felt it absolutely imperative that for a mayor to be really the executive leader of our city, as the charter defines him, he must run, his name must be on the ballot, completely unfettered by any ties as to commitments or philosophies or anything else except that of being the best mayor he knows how to be.
You, in the campaign, you won a smashing victory.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Perhaps
70% of the vote, which was, I think, quite good for me.
This was probably more attributable to your record, perhaps, than it was to your strategy. I don't know. What do you think that would be true, or?
Well, hindsight, of course, is not. It makes, as you know, hindsight is always 20/20 vision. Perhaps so. Looking though in the time frame at the moment, Guy, with the council so closely divided, the only way that a mayor could have been successful was to have been completely on his own. And I doubt really if I would have secured the vote that I did receive had I been the candidate of any particular group.
What? Do you have any particular comments on the strategy of campaigning, or how you waged a campaign once you had resolved that you wouldn't run on the slate?
No, I believe that any candidate for a major public office, and the mayor of the city of our size is certainly one, has to make several basic decisions to himself. First of all, it's awfully easy to make promises, and those promises come home to haunt you. If you're not careful, you find yourself promising people or groups of people things in an effort to secure their support that you know you cannot fulfill. Secondly, and I had three opponents, three people ran against me in the race. Secondly, I had the basic realization that what I said in the way of campaign speeches or election propaganda was different than what they were saying. I had three opponents, three people ran against me in the race. Secondly, I had the basic realization that what I said in the way of campaign speeches or election propaganda was different than what they were saying. By they, I mean my opponents, because they were not the mayor. I was the mayor. And when I made irrational statements about city finances or acquisitions that I knew could not be sustained, as anyone not in office can do, it was different when the mayor was saying those things in an effort to secure votes. So I adopted in my own mind the determination that regardless of what the opponents would say in the way of personalities or issues, I would not answer them directly or counter charges, if that's the right word, if in any way it would appear that because I was the mayor of the city at that moment, so saying those things would in any way cast a doubt or concern or leave the city itself in an unfavorable light.
Is it harder, do you think, for an incumbent to be a politician seeking office than it is for the challenger?
Well, the incumbent has advantages and disadvantages. The incumbent has the advantage of being better known. He has the advantage of considerable publicity and coverage and news items because he is mayor, because he is the incumbent, and a number of people tend to vote for a name they know. On the other side of the coin, there are I understand by students that there are 10% of all the voters who automatically vote no or against anything. As the incumbent, you automatically then garnered a 10% negative vote just because you are the mayor. There are people who will vote to turn you out. irrespective. The big problem, though, as I said, is the fact that in campaigning, the incumbent must stick to the unvarnished truth, because if he says something in an effort to answer an unfounded attack, I don't mean on himself personally, but on an issue, then he finds himself in a position where he's leaving his city or his office high and dry by saying things that he would not say except for the fact that he was in this political race.
Well, after the election was over and you were back in office for 2 more years, then you faced continuing problems one after another.
Well, the problems after the election, Guy, were of a different nature. You'll recall that in that same election, 3 more ARG councilmen were elected, which meant that the council was 7 ARG councilmen, and the 8th one, Mr. Bill Bishop from South Oklahoma City, Ward 4, had been chairman of the Planning Commission, was a man greatly interested in civic affairs, and he made, at least while I was mayor, made one of the finest councilmen that we had. So my point is that after the election, we had 8 very high-class, dedicated councilmen, all working to the same end. So the 4-to-4 situation completely dropped out of concern, and the attentions of the mayor's office then were turned not to the problem of keeping the council moving forward, but to then the problems of the city itself.
One of the problems, I guess, wasn't there some dispute over the Lake Atoka situation?
Yes, and that's not entirely resolved. What you have referenced is the fact that some people in Atoka, particularly a man who had been mayor of Atoka and who had a fishing camp out on the lake, had instituted a number of different lawsuits against the city. In fact, I think at one time there were 12 different lawsuits involved over aspects of the city's right to police and control the lake itself. A number of the people in Atoka felt that the lake was sort of free for anyone to use, and had built fishing camps and duck camps and different things like that on the lake. The Atoka situation, to which you refer, was limited to all of this litigation. I made several trips to Atoka, met with groups of Atoka County residents in an effort to try to resolve the fears that they had in their minds. The litigation is gradually being terminated by various Supreme Court decisions at this time. The big problem that we faced with the new council was that of municipal finance. The city literally had its back to the wall financially. I have reference to our general fund, the operating fund, not the capital funds, because the city had voted bonds in 61 and 62, some 88 millions, for a number of needed capital improvements. But we were in a situation where the money was available to build a new fire station out of capital improvement money, but the general fund money was not there to staff it. So we had fire stations, for example, with just maybe 1 or 2 firemen. And the same with police. We had money for a new police station, but didn't have money to hire a policeman, or at least pay them decent wages. The fantastically difficult problem of solving the city's financial dilemma was, I assume, our number one issue when we all went back into office.
Do you want me to get you a coat? You may be freezing to death in here. Well, how'd you go about solving the problem then?
We had a finance committee of the council, of which Mr. Frankla was chairman. We conducted a number of studies on the best way to increase our general fund budget. I felt that to be successful, we must have a citizens participation group some way to bring the citizens themselves in, so that everyone would know that it was truly a problem and not merely something that we had told the citizens to be a problem. We appointed a citizen study committee. Mr. R.T. Scott of the Scott Chevrolet was chairman. We had some 20 or 25 members of the committee, and their function was to go into all aspects of the city's operating activities and to determine how many dollars it was short to bring the level of activity up to the minimum required of a city of our size and character. The committee met with every department of the city government. They broke themselves down into subcommittees, and their report came in September of '65 and told us that the city was some $10 million a year short of operating money to bring it up to a level that the people had a right to expect. And then with that report, the council itself then turned to the problem of where that money could come from. There were several proposals as to new revenue. One was an occupation license tax. That would be that the city would put a license tax on everyone who conducted a business or a profession or an occupation within the city. So much a year for lawyers and so much for all other groups and professions, businesses and whatnot. Another was an earnings tax, but that was sort of a gross income tax, a tax on your gross earnings. The difficulty with that was that the legislature had since repealed the general enabling legislation for an earnings tax and limited it to only our residents. That meant that if someone earned his salary in Oklahoma City but lived in another city, we could not tax his earnings. And the third proposal was that of a municipal sales tax. The preceding legislature had authorized the cities to levy against their residents only any tax that the state itself could levy against its residents, which was a broad grant of power to a municipality. And after considerable study with our finance committee, and we convened a advisory finance committee of citizens. Mr. Chuck Stewart over at the Fidelity Bank was chairman. Ed Oppenheim, Bus Baker, people such as that were on the committee. They told us that, in their opinion, some $8 million a year could be raised by a 1 cent municipal sales tax. The council reached the decision in late September to go the sales tax route. Then it became a question of quietly checking with civic leaders, all other facets of the community to see how receptive they would be, and second as to the amount, whether it would be a half a cent or a 1 cent. Half a cent, you see, would produce some 5 millions, 4 millions or so, and a 1 cent would produce, we hoped, about 8 million. I personally resolved that only the mayor was in the position to do that. I checked with practically every community leader, whether it be the Retailers Association, organized labor. And in this regard, many organized labor people recognized our need, and several of the labor groups endorsed the sales tax. Others didn't. With our publishers, I checked with, as I say, every civic group, the League of Women Voters and whatnot in town. I found, first of all, a broad recognition of the need. No one questioned that the city needed the money. And after these preliminary surveys, the council called the election for November.
And the sales tax passed, and
carried 2-1. That has been quite a historic election, Guy, and the Oklahoma Municipal League, for example, points to it with considerable interest. We were the first city in Oklahoma to submit the sales tax to a vote of the people under this enabling legislation. We had a number of factors working for us. For example, we felt that our neighbor sister cities likewise must join in with us to overcome the business of, well, why have a penny tax here and across the city limit lines in the Midwest city not have it. We secured the cooperation of 5 other cities, Norman, Midwest City, and Dale City, and Nichols Hills, and our sister cities submitted it at the same time. That was a factor in our favor. We secured the endorsements of the retailers when we explained how that it would in effect help their sales, not hurt it, because all this additional money coming into the city, it was certainly obvious we didn't intend to pocket it away or hoard it. We intended to spend it immediately on increased salaries or the purchase of new equipment for the city. The money would be spent within 24 hours after it came into the city coffers, and with all that additional money paid to our employees and the like, and over 60% of it would go for salaries, that in turn would benefit the retailers. We secured any number of favorable endorsements, and the Lowell Runkle organization was our public relations director. I myself tried to give what leadership I could to the campaign. Fred Boston, a man of considerable political talent, assumed the responsibility of being campaign chairman. The campaign was short, whirlwind, blitzkrieg type, and as I said, carried 2-1. As the Municipal League has pointed out, that became the bell cow solution for Oklahoma municipalities. Had it not carried in Oklahoma City, probably no other city across the state would have submitted it to their people. Since then, some 44, I believe, cities have adopted the sales tax, including Tulsa, Muskogee, Ardmore, McAllister, and most of the other cities. I'm very proud of Oklahoma City's role in giving municipal leadership across the state.
Oklahoma City stands out in a perhaps a little more subtle way. It seems to me in the race relationship, or the race, the lack of riots and things like that, and I'm wondering if you've got any comments to make on the strategy the leadership of the city has had about racial problems, or?
Well, all I can comment on is as I see it at this particular point in time. Approximately 11% of Oklahoma City is Negro. We have other minority groups, of course, but I'm sure that's the group to which you had reference. We have had a very fine leadership in Oklahoma City among all classes of our people. I admire greatly the quality of leadership among the Negroes themselves. We've had, as you know, a second Negro now on the city council. I'm not deliberately or willfully or intentionally, but I made certain that the Negro was integrated into the mainstream of community life in the same way that I made certain that the PTA and organized labor and all other groups were recognized and felt to be a part of our community. By circumstance, I live, and my home is still in the area of Oklahoma City that is predominantly Negro. I consider them people of good neighbors, and by attempting to be a good neighbor with them, the mayor's office had excellent relations with our Negro citizens. I appointed a number of very fine Negroes to boards and commissions. I know of no instance where they didn't, those members work harder, or at least as hard as the hardest working other members of those boards or commissions. In addition to that, we took the forefront. We were one of the first cities in the United States to have a community relations commission. The commission was chaired and still is by Mr. Arnold Fagan, who himself has been very active in the matter of community relations. We've had fortunate posture in meeting on a hand-to-hand, eye-to-eye level with all facets of our Negro community. I have no particular formula to offer, except that I believe our Negroes are just as fine a citizens as any others.
There probably are, and some problems in this and in every other area,
certainly
embryonic, that that were apparently headed off by the leadership of the city. For instance, the brutality charges.
Yes. We have had those things. We had a march, you recall, on the police station in connection with the so-called brutality question. I went down and marched partway with them. Not that I wanted to make it appear the mayor was according dignity to what they were doing. I felt that was the very thing I should not do. But by being there and discussing it with them, by circumstance, the TV cameras were covering my participation. I could air by my discussion what I said and what the responses were, the position of the community, and by not meeting it head on, now that could be misunderstood, but by meeting it on a hand-to-hand, eye-to-eye basis, it dissipated, and of course was short-circuited and became meaningless.
Several of the things I've read witness to how flexible and colorful you've been as mayor. Someone had the cartoon about color him colorful, which probably typifies it.
Thank you.
And so I'd like to get you to comment or two about some of these things in particular and about your strategy.
Well, that does require a little explanation, Guy. I feel that, and I know you do too, that any institution, person, philosophy, or whatever it is, to be successful, must have a flair or must have a gimmick to get it across. I recall the story of the lady who couldn't get her applications for a job seen by the right people, so she went down to a little canning factory and had them can in a tin can her little request, and she sent these cans in, and of course people opened the cans and there it was. Things such as that. My basic approach to that is that I would do anything to draw favorable attention to my city, as long as it was not corny or as long as it was not in poor taste. I felt that to draw attention to the needs of our city and to the beauties and the wonders of our state, particularly to Oklahoma City, it required a little showmanship. And I use that word in its favorable sense, of course. I tried very hard to do anything that I felt would, in a light manner, draw attention to what I was attempting to sell, namely our city, as long as I did not do it in a tasteless or tactless way. Yes, we did have a number of cases such as that.
I know, for instance, there's no telling how much it would have cost to have gotten the publicity for Oklahoma City that you got through making Carol Channing an Indian.
Yes, Miss Channing and I became great friends. We were accused of attempting to upstage each other, but my basic the first thing I would always try to do was to capitalize on a situation and turn it to our advantage. I have reference to the water shortage in the city of New York, and you recall that the Oklahoma exhibit at the World's Fair included greenery and plantings, and with the water shortage it was impossible to water it. So I borrowed a big tank truck from one of our local firms. We had this big ceremony. I got the Chamber of Commerce to pay for the big posters on the side. We took the tank truck down in front of City Hall, had the publicity there. With the hose, we turned the valve and filled the tank truck with water from our Lake Atoka pipeline. Had a meter on it. We even metered the water that went in the tank, and then I personally right then and there paid the city at the going rate for that water, and we shipped the water with this tank truck to New York City. I've heard any number of people tell me they saw that tank truck go through their town. It crossed New York City on 34th Street, right at the midday traffic. Any countless folks have seen that big truck going by with Oklahoma water on, headed for the World's Fair. You see, it was a legitimate, worthwhile gimmick or gadget to capitalize on an already existing state of facts, namely the water shortage in New York. I had a side effect from that that I didn't expect. My name, Shirk, is a little unusual, and all the news releases, of course, of the water tank trucks that progressed across the country included my name. And I think I had letters from every Shirk in the United States wanting to know if I was any relative of theirs. So I certainly got an inventory of people named Shirk.
It's not every city that's annexed the moon either.
Oh, yes. Well, that was an effort to raise money for the Science and Arts Foundation. The Science and Arts Foundation wished to buy this large replica of the moon, or not replica, but scale model. We had to raise money for it, so we hit on the idea of selling square feet of land for $1 or whatever it was with a little certificate. I reserved out a section for City Hall on the moon and put the rest on the market. Oddly enough, it went out on UPI and AP, and the Tonight Show thought it was a worthwhile gimmick. They sent an ABC cameraman down here. We staked out on the moon. We used had a big flag that said ABC that I carried, and then a little one identical on a miniature. And then we appeared to put it on the moon, and then the camera, of course, switched over to the other scale flag, and they paid us $100 for their part of the moon. It worked real well.
You seem to have a particular flair or knack for turning things to the...
Oh, yes, sir, you must.
And, for instance, when I believe it was an airline executive who said, what will people do at night in Oklahoma City? That was
yes,
turning the table.
There was an article in the Wall Street Journal about the problem of foreign tourists, because, as you know, in our country it's difficult to find any language spoken but our own. And so the president of Allegheny Airlines, who had specialized in short tours for visitors from across the seas, wound up his interview by saying that the tourists had so much trouble entertaining themselves in the evenings in American cities, primarily because of the language problem. And he said, for example, what does one do at night in Oklahoma City? I assume he just pulled Oklahoma City out of the hat, like sometimes you say Kalamazoo or some other name. And everyone began flooding me with clippings of this article in the journal. So I thought, well, fine, we'll just have some fun with this gentleman. So we got a gallon of aspirin tablets, and really a whole gallon of aspirin tablets. And so I publicly mailed them to him by Air Express, with the announcement that there is so many things to do in Oklahoma City at night, And I made him a list: the Symphony, the Science and Arts Foundation, the Art Center, the Mummers, and all those things, that he would need this gallon of aspirin tablets because he'd be up all night seeing the things there are to do here. It turned out real well. He went along with the gag. He wrote me back and promised to come. In fact, he did send some of his staff out here, and I really gave them a show while they were here. So it did turn the tables, and it was to our advantage.
I think that the thing that struck me as the most showmanlike of all was writing 6 stories up on a tree. I want to know the inside story, whether you and that man were rigged on that or what. You were a daredevil, regardless of what it was.
Well, in all fairness, I wouldn't want the crane operator to lose his job over it. I called to make sure that he didn't. But they were planting 2 very large trees on the 6th floor of the Skirvin Tower in that sort of a little garden spot up there. They'd gotten a large crane down on it was parked in Park Avenue to lift these trees up. It was part of the mayor's beautification program. I had announced sometime before that on these dedications I would not go out and cut a ribbon, but I would go out and plant a tree. A lot of people took me serious on that. Instead of having ribbon cuttings, they were having tree plantings all over the city. The governor had announced, 1 million new trees to be planted, and I said, well, we'll plant them right here in Oklahoma City, Governor Bellman, if you'll just let me. So I went over to participate in hoisting these 2 giant trees with a ball of dirt up to the 6th floor. So the press people wanted to have a picture of me standing on the tree as it went up. I got up on the thing, and the crane operator lifted it about 6 feet off the ground, and they were taking all these pictures. Suddenly, in whatever you want to call it, just a flash. At the moment, I thought, well, why not just go on up? It isn't going to hurt me. It was obviously perfectly safe. I was standing on the big ball. I wasn't on the hook or the crane or anything. I was standing on the ball with my hand on the chain. So I looked over at the crane operator, who was right on my eye level, and kind of gave him a little quizzical look, and he sort of nodded that he would take me up. And so I hollered not hollered, but I spoke to him right across maybe 10 feet. I said, okay, let's go up. And up we went. And most people thought it was a better story by making out as though that I went up against my will. I didn't say either way. I just let the people tell the stories the way they wanted it to.
Well, there probably are people who are interested in it still speculating today about why you chose not to run again. Why did you choose not to run again?
Well, from what a number of people had told me, and from the number of letters I had received, and the people who had urged me to run again, in candor and in humility, I believe I could have been reelected without too much trouble. But I feel this: that our charter was written when Oklahoma City was much smaller than it is, and life was much more simple and less sophisticated. In those days, the running of our city, when our charter was written, our city budget was around $2 million a year. It's now $26 million. So the affairs of the city, but from cost alone, you see, are 13 times more involved now than then. The charter requires the mayor to be the chief executive officer of the city. That is the name that the mayor's office is assigned. To be effective, the mayor must devote his time. There is no other way out of it. It's impossible to be at meetings, preside over this, bring into the mainstream of community activity all facets of our city, and not be there to do it. You can't do it by remote control, or you can't do it through administrative assistance. Knowing that, I felt that I should give the mayor's office the time it required to rebuild our city back into a position of importance. I felt that I had done that as best I knew how, and I felt that within 4 more years, if I were to run again, my law practice would have been
This interview is a part of the Oklahoma Historical Society's Oral History Program, Living Legends Collection. This interview was originally conducted on June the 15th, 1967. The collection. This interview was originally conducted on June the 15th, 1967. The collection. This interview was originally conducted on June the 15th, 1967. The collection. This interview was originally conducted on June the 15th, 1967. The collection. This interview was originally conducted on June the 15th, 1967. The collection. This interview was originally conducted on June the 15th, 1967. The collection. This interview was originally conducted on June the 15th, 1967. The collection.
And I felt that within 4 more years, if I were to run again, my law practice would have been severely penalized. I would be 58 years old. For a lawyer, the 50s are your productive years in your practice. I enjoy travel. I enjoy other activities such as promoting Oklahoma history. I've written a book on Oklahoma place names. I hope to write another one on Oklahoma history. And I felt that for 4 more years of the type of job that I would demand that myself give the city as mayor would penalize a number of other things. I felt that my mission had been accomplished in that the reason that Mr. Ware and Mr. Love and the others selected me as the compromise mayor had fulfilled. We had solved the city's financial problems. I had seen urban renewal and a number of things on the way, and I felt that I should return to private life.
A question that's closely related to that. The biggest city in Oklahoma?
Biggest city in the United States.
Biggest city in the United States?
Absolutely. 649 square miles.
And you had a marvelous platform, I would assume, to run for governor. Many people wanted you to run for governor. And what was your thinking on that matter?
You mean in prospective or retrospective thinking, Guy?
Both.
Well, in retrospect, the election timing was such that I would have had to have run for governor or announced for governor while I had yet a year to serve as mayor. I did not see how I could effectively be mayor and be running for another office. I would have either had been required to resign as mayor or to be a mayor in name only and be out campaigning for another office. I felt that if I resigned as mayor, I would give testimony against the very thing that I was standing for when I was selected as mayor. Here, because I was selected to solve the dilemma created by another person resigning as mayor, and then how could I be the instrumentality to bring about an identical situation again? So the idea of my resigning was anathema to me. So that meant that would I be willing to be a mayor in name only for 10 months, 11 months, while I was campaigning for another office. My decision was no, that I had work to do and an obligation to fulfill at City Hall.
By the time you had gone out as mayor, due probably largely to your leadership and character, the complexity of many of the city problems had changed, and the image of the mayor's office had changed, and So with this in mind, I'd like to get you to philosophize a little bit about your views on the mayor's office and.
Well, it'll be hard to get me to philosophize a little bit. First of all, let's start at the beginning. We have three types of city government that are in vogue here in America. We have the commission form of government, such as we have in Tulsa today. We have the city manager form of government, and we have what is commonly called the strong mayor form of government. Well, that doesn't mean that the mayor is a strong-minded individual. It means that the office of mayor is strong and has great power. Taking the commission form first, that is a form of government where each commissioner, there's the water commissioner and the street commissioner and the fire commissioner and all those different people, each heads his own department and each is elected. And then collectively they form the city commission. That is a form of government that is difficult for it to work efficiently, particularly if these commissioners are elected on party or partisan platforms, partisan basis. And jokingly, for example, we can have a situation where the water commissioner would be a Democrat and the fire commissioner would be a Republican. So to thwart his political opposite, the water commissioner would always put his fire plugs in places where the fire commissioner didn't want them, and so on. And it's difficult to achieve harmony, as we have a weakness today in our state government with all of our state officials elected. You see, they all work for the same person, namely the electorate, and there is no one who has leadership except by force of personality over them. So it is with the commission form of government. Each commissioner is responsible to no one except to the people, and they intend to work in their own little empires or little bailiwicks and disregard the interests of the city as a whole. Next, the strong mayor form of government. Now that means that the mayor, who is an elected official, is in fact the one who controls and runs the city. Primarily, he hires and fires the city employees. We have that form of government in most of our largest cities. Now, we have it not by choice in larger cities such as Chicago, New York, but because they have always been that way. The strong mayor form of government was our first form of municipal government in America. They have been that way traditionally, and because of the very thing I'm going to mention next, it's impossible for the electorate of those cities to change them. They have them, and there's nothing can be done about it if they wanted to change them. Now, a strong mayor controls, not a strong mayor with personality-wise, but a strong mayor who is in an office of great power, controls a vast amount of machinery and personnel and money. Here in Oklahoma City, if we had the strong mayor form of government, here would be a man who would control, literally control, the expenditures of some $26 million a year, and would be able to hire and fire some 3,200 employees. Now, each employee, of course, has a family. That would be a minimum block of 11 or 12,000 votes, plus the votes that would be incidental to the expenditure. I have reference to which contractors you employ, which architects you retain, and so on, incident to the expenditure of some $26 million. The net result is that a mayor in that position, so inclined, could build a political machine that would control a city government so effectively that it would be impossible to dislodge, except upon a major scandal or something like that, an inefficient form of city government. A strong mayor is often pointed out as desirable because he is the one elected. He is the one that should be responsible. I agree, that is true. But all of us must be practical enough to realize that the electorate has no way of keeping itself informed on the details, notwithstanding the wonderful services performed by our media, who we have the finest media in the world here in America. Yet the electorate naturally has their own problems to concern with, and a strong mayor form of government tends to build municipal political machines that are very difficult to dislodge, and of course once they're there they tend to be inefficient as far as the expenditure of the public dollar, municipal dollar. The city manager form of government is a later concept and is the philosophy where a so-called professional is employed to run the city government itself. They run the technical workings of the city, the refuge, the garbage, and so on as that, and leaves to the elected officials of the city, the mayor and the council, the policy-making matters, as well as the responsibility of interpreting the needs of the community and the wishes of the electorate. The city manager form of government has the advantage of bringing professionalism to City Hall, and you see city services are like everything else, are becoming more and more sophisticated and more expensive. Our two sewage treatment plants here in Oklahoma City, which were built in the early 50s, are now obsolete because of better and more efficient methods. The technical services in all of our branches of city government, even in the way of fire and police, are becoming much more skilled because of technical advances, and the philosophy is, and properly so, that they should be left to skilled technical administrators, not concerned in political affairs, and with leaving the political situation, the interpretation of the electorate's requirements, to the elected officials. That's the bright side of a city manager form of government. The other side of the coin is that it tends to diffuse responsibility. It's a little difficult for the elected official who must answer to the people to go down through the hierarchy of lateral command through the city manager's office to secure moderately simple things to be done, such as changing a street light or something as that. The city manager form of government, in my opinion, is the most workable and the most desirable, and I don't think these words will ever come back to haunt me, the most desirable of municipal government if the right people are in the job positions. It is the most dastardly form of municipal government if the wrong people are in the office. For example, if we had a city manager who was interested in political matters, or ran City Hall to favor a political group, or he himself had political ambitions, or he wished to further the political ambitions of some of his friends, or if, on the other hand, we had a mayor or city councilman who did not recognize the requirements of the charter, and they attempted to tinker around in administrative matters, the hiring and firing of personnel and such as that. But my point is that the city manager form of government is the best one if the right people are in the slots, and it's probably the worst one if the wrong people are in the positions.
Talking about the caliber of people you have, do you think that the problem of getting responsible people to seek office is a lessening problem now?
No, unfortunately I don't. I wish I could say that it were. I think that answer to that is self-evident, Guy, when you realize that all four of the incumbent city councilmen refused to run again after serving one term. I believe you will agree with me that all four of those men are very high-class, successful business men, full of integrity and honor, personally very devout, sincere, conscientious men. The reasons why each one of them chose not to run, I'm sure, are their own reasons. But from that emerges, to my mind, and the fact myself, emerges the theme, or perhaps a pattern, of a person, once he's served a term, realizes that the demands are such that he cannot continue. It's very difficult to say what are responsible men. I know what you mean, and I know you'll understand my answers. But in America, and unfortunately we all live in America, everyone has equal opportunities for everything, and it's very difficult to categorize people into classes and say these people have the qualifications, these people should be our city officials, these should be excluded. And in theory, anyone has the right to run for any office they wish, and the electorate should be discerning enough to select the best man for the position. Your question dealt on is it becoming more difficult or less difficult for responsible men to run for municipal office. I don't think it's becoming less difficult. I do think this, that local government is our only government here in America that's close to home. It's the only government that you and I live with on our daily basis. All of our, with possibly the exception of the post office and the highway system, everything that you and I use every day and that we take for granted, that we could not be a last third of a 20th century citizen without. I'm speaking, of course, of air pollution, environmental health, fire, police, refuge, water, all of the things that you and I use every day and take for granted and would raise sand about if we didn't have them furnished us unendingly. All of those activities, all of those services are provided for us by our local government. Our best public dollar is our municipal dollar. I can illustrate it to you very simply. Take our own budget here in Oklahoma City of some 25 million, divide it by the population of Oklahoma City, and you'll see that our city government costs us per capita around $75 a year, which includes the amount that you and I pay in police court fines and water and refuge and garbage and sewer service and all of that. Take our state budget of $225 million, divide it by our population, and you'll see that our state government costs us over $100 a year. And on the national level, of course, with a budget of $125 billion, you'll see that our national per capita cost is many times more. And what do each of us get for that public dollar from each of those three echelons of government? Well, of course, half of the national budget is for defense, and we can't put a price tag on the American way of life, of course. So just cut the national budget in half. So what do we get for half of our national budget that you and I use and demand every day and take for granted? Well, of course, I mentioned the post office, but really very little else that all of us must have to be 1967 style citizens. The same with the state level. And I'm not disparaging our other echelons of government. They perform a vital role, of course. But it's on the local level where we every citizen, every single person in every level of life, regardless of the highest or the lowest, must rely on his municipal services to survive. This small envelope of air that I move around in, that's mine temporarily, that I occupy, is protected for me, is made pure, it's sanitized, it's protected from fire and vandalism and theft and heat and cold and all these other things for me in a way by my local government. Without my local government, it would be impossible for me to survive. Literally, I couldn't. I would become a cave dweller or something. So, in the American system of things, and particularly our Western way of life, it is absolutely vital, it's absolutely essential, if the Western philosophy of democracy survive, that local government must be made stronger, its integrity preserved, and above all, its powers must not be diluted by extraneous forces. I had a very delightful day just 2 weeks ago with the mayor of Athens, Greece, Mayor George Shirk. He speaks excellent English. We acted by the evening as though we'd been lifelong friends. He told me some of his problems. For example, in most of the European countries, the municipal police are not appointed or hired or fired by the mayor or by the city, but are appointed by the governor of the province, who in turn is appointed by the Minister of the Interior, which of course makes the local police merely instruments of the national government. The political implications of that are obvious. I say to you that as long as you and I, as local citizens, can control, by electing a man down the street as our city councilman, who in turn collectively appoints a city manager who they can hire and fire overnight, who in turn hires and fires our policemen, who are responsible to no one, I repeat, who are responsible to no one except ourselves, then the integrity as well as the existence itself of our local government will be protected and secured for us. The minute that our police, for example, must report to some commissar up the line or to some official off somewhere else, rather than report to us, why our Western way of life is in trouble, and as long as that is not the case, I have no fear as to democracy, using the word in its pure sense in our country.
Do you think that things like the Demonstration Cities bill, for instance, represent the possibility that the role at the municipal level would diminish?
Yes and no. Now, there's been so much political hay made over the so-called demonstration cities. It's now called the Model Cities Act. The name even became inappropriate. For those who want to look at the merits, the good side of that, they point to this, that the national government itself, with its massive taxing power, it is the only instrument of government that we have that actually has the money to do these things. As long as Uncle Sam retains this massive taxing power, he must use that money to solve the problems of its citizens where those problems are. And the problems are in the cities. Open space, forests, trees, mountains, plains, hills do not create problems. People create problems. And people create the problems where they are. And their problems increase geometrically by the number of people in any given area. The city is man's second oldest institution. The family unit, of course, is the oldest. Cities are mentioned some 1,300 times in the King James Version of the Bible. All of us know that the role of the city antedates any of our philosophical concepts today. One must only look to the Old Testament to find adequate proof of that. And most of the action of the Old Testament, if we exclude the Ark and the creation itself, took place in cities. Because why? That's where the problems were. That's where the people were. I jokingly pointed out about our demonstration marches that we have here in our country. I suspect the mayor of Jericho had a demonstration on his hand such as none of us mayors today have ever seen. I can well imagine the implications here in Oklahoma City if a group of people marched around our city and blew 100 ram's horns 7 times a day and such as that. Yes, they'd get results too, just as the mayor of Jericho found to his consternation. Well, I'm off the subject. So with the problems in the cities, it's only natural that Uncle Sam with the money is going to go and become partners or help with his money where they are. And we've seen develop just within the last decade the philosophy of a partnership between the city and the national government, bypassing the intervening echelons of government, the counties, the states, and so on, and seeing a broad-based hand-in-hand partnership between city government and the national government in an effort to accomplish needed things. That partnership is much broader than the average person realizes. We overlook that 50% of our new airport, excluding the building itself, was built with federal funds. We overlook the fact that all of our hospitals in Oklahoma City are built in part with Hill-Burton money. We overlook the fact that all of our libraries are financed in part by federal grants, and so on down the line. We seem to get involved in our political philosophies as to what's good and what's bad, rather than judge the results on their merits. Those who do not approve of the philosophy of a partnership between the cities and the national government tend to point out that it's federal control and it's creeping socialism and it's all those things. Well, of course it is, and that's not good. But what other plan could we devise to solve these problems? Merely by railing against them or by castigating against the philosophy of creeping socialism and all that, that does not in itself solve anything. That doesn't clear a slum. That does not provide money to buy open space for a park. That does not provide money to build a new library. That doesn't provide money to build a much-needed runway for our terminal so our businessmen can use their own private airplanes to go on their own, quote, business trips, end quote. What does provide the money? Well, the money must come from somewhere, of course. Can it come from our city coffers? No, we don't have it. If you were mayor, how would you go about getting the money to enlarge Will Rogers Terminal? And I mean that question in an academic manner, of course. Well, there's several solutions, of course. One is for Uncle Sam to divest himself of part of his taxing power and give us, for example, a credit. I have proposed many times that Uncle Sam give a credit against federal income tax of 25% of the tax, not a deduction on income, but a credit against the tax, up to 25% for those who have paid up to that sum on municipal improvements. For example, if I paid $1,000 to Oklahoma City for any given purposes listed in the statute, I could use that $1,000 as a credit against $1,000 worth of my federal income tax. That circumvents the necessity of the money going to Washington, being diluted there by administrative overhead, and coming back in less than it was sent up. The difficulty, if on that though, and when we must be honest with ourselves, we must analyze each of us how much we get back for every dollar we send to Washington. And it's interesting to analyze the tables. New Jersey, for example, only gets back 17 cents for every dollar it sends to Washington, whereas the highest of the states is Alaska, and it gets back some $4 for every dollar it sends to Washington. For us here in Oklahoma, we're on the plus side. And Oklahoma gets back more federal dollars than it sends to Washington in taxation. So you see, we must be very careful when we rail against sending money to Washington, because actually our state is getting back more than we're sending. So before we find too much fault with federal, municipal, federal, local participation hand in hand, let's be sure we're acquainted with the facts. As I've often quoted Elbert Hubbard, any man has a right to his own opinion, but no man has a right to be wrong on his facts.
What do you, looking here prospectively, what do you think the big problems of the cities in the future will be? Urban renewal?
Our city or cities generally?
Well, cities generally, then our city.
Well, I don't think it is urban renewal, no. Renewal is a constantly continuing process. Your body renews itself. I understand, except for your teeth and certain things, there's not a cell in your body that was there a year ago. Renewal is a continuing thing, and cities will continue to renew themselves physically. By that I mean the bricks and the stones, just by sheer weight of economic power. As long as we have private ownership in this country, a property, the owners of those properties, assuming that they're in their right minds, will use them to their best economic advantage. And whether that's to raise them, turn them to parking lots, eventually build them into office buildings, or what. The difficulty with that, of course, is that new economic uses demand new and different concepts of land ownership. When our downtown was laid out, economic uses of land required that the land be in 25-foot pieces. And 25 by 140 was the right size to own a piece of land to conduct a commercial activity on it. A little storefront, a little blacksmith shop, a little saddlery, a little hardware store. That was the economic uses of land in 1890 when our city was laid out. That no longer is the economic way to use land. Now, economic, I don't mean the cheapest way, but the way it is used for economic use. Now it requires, for economic use, different sizes of land, such as our Penn Square and Shepherd Mall and those. And the idea of a 25-foot storefront is really rather ludicrous in a city of our size. Well, except for cases where the land can be voluntarily blocked up, to turn land economically used requires one of two things. Either that the new entrepreneur go out somewhere where he can secure a piece of land suitable to his use, which tends to be out in the suburbs or in areas yet undeveloped, abandoning the older traditional parts of town, or it requires some governmental power using eminent domain or whatever technique is available to block up
into a now valid economic use these small bits and gores and pieces of land that no longer are economically suitable. And that is the true role of urban renewal. I often comment to myself as I look at great cities across the earth. Paris is an excellent example. And I recall that the Emperor Napoleon III commissioned the prefect of Paris, George Shirk, to just rebuild the city. And he did. He had the most gigantic urban renewal. I often comment to myself as I look at great cities across the earth. Paris is an excellent example. And I recall that the Emperor Napoleon III commissioned the prefect of Paris, George Shirk, to just rebuild the city. And he did. He had the most gigantic urban renewal program our globe has ever seen. And he did it ruthlessly. He did it by imperial edict. Cut through those big avenues. It's hard to visualize the countless number of little shopkeepers and entrepreneurs that were forced out of existence permanently because of Haussmann and his desire to run an avenue or a boulevard where he decided it should go. And the same in Rome. We all hear of Augustus, who found Rome in brick and left it in marble. Augustus had, again by imperial power, one of the greatest urban renewal programs our globe has ever known. He completely renewed Rome. And in doing so, I'm certain he ousted from those little brick hovels and corners and crannies countless of little oil vendors and harness makers and shoe cobblers and carpenters and the like. As they were in these little brick things, he ousted them and built for them the great marketplaces and the forums and the agoras that we see today in ruins. As we look at those wonderful cities of the past. So there's nothing new about urban renewal. And to answer your question, I do not view urban renewal as the number one problem, or I believe you said problem, of cities today. I do think this, that probably the greatest challenge facing our cities today is to cope with the technological advances of our country and our way of life, to make certain that the city can keep up with it. As I mentioned, these things increase these problems by geometric progression as more and more people assemble. Our planners tell us that Oklahoma City will be 1 million people by 1988. Well, to service 1 million people with adequate health and sanitary, water, all these other services that they demand, keeping in mind those services will continue to become more and more sophisticated in ways yet undreamed of. Between now and 1988, the challenge of the city is that the city itself, and I'm now referring to the city government, not the community of people, but the challenge to the city government will be that it must keep stride with these developments and these growths. I'm willing to call it progress. Some people would question that. To make certain that the role of the city does remain full of integrity and protected and to the benefit of its own citizens, and that the city does not abrogate I said abrogate, also abdicate its role, and as nature abhors a vacuum, some other role of government or level of government will rush in to do the job. my one-sentence answer to your question is that the challenge that faces the cities of this last third of the 20th century is that they must continue strong, responsive to the people, with integrity, and to be able to perform the essential, vital, local municipal services required and expected and demanded, and by the way, the people have a right to demand them, without abdicating that chore to someone else.
I think a good way to close this interview would be, first of all, to say if you have things to say that we missed, to feel free to say them, and then if not, or after you've said them, to ask you if you have any parting words of advice for any of our students or any who are younger who may listen to this tape.
Well, advice is just worth what you pay for it, of course. And gratuitous advice is not one of my lines. I do repeat the point I've been attempting to make all morning, Guy, and that is that if we in this country are to preserve and continue to keep it healthy, our Western philosophy of democracy, it must be done, again I say must be done on the local level. And we are doing ourselves, our individual citizens, each of us are doing ourselves and those to come in the future a tremendous disservice if we do not recognize the vital role in the scheme of things played by our local government, and to see that it is maintained in integrity.
Thank you very much. I've taken your whole morning here, just about.
So there. Now I'll start on my speech. 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 Now I'll start on my speech.